I stood in my living room as the clock hit midnight, music loud, glasses clinking, smiles everywhere. "Happy New Year, Ethan," someone shouted. I smiled back and nodded because that was what a happy man was supposed to do. My name is Ethan Miller, and until tonight, I thought my life was complete. My wife, Rachel Miller, stood near the couch, one hand on her pregnant belly, laughing softly as people congratulated us. "You look nervous," my friend Jake said, handing me a drink. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." "You're about to be a dad," he laughed. "Get used to it." Rachel met my eyes across the room and smiled. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't know why. I told myself it was stress, excitement, nothing more. Everyone kept talking about the baby, the future, the house getting smaller. I nodded, answered questions, played the role. "Ethan, come here," Rachel said quietly after the countdown ended.
"Now?"
I asked. "Everyone's still here." "Please," she said. Her voice shook. I followed her into the hallway. The noise faded, leaving only the hum of the heater. She wouldn't look at me. She folded her hands, then unfolded them. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Are you sick?" "No," she whispered. I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" I laughed nervously. "You're scaring me." She took a deep breath. "Ethan, there's something you need to know about the baby." I stared at her. "What about the baby?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Tears filled her eyes. "Please don't yell." "Rachel," I said slowly, "what are you talking about?" "The baby," she said. "It's not." "Not what?" My heart started pounding. "Not healthy." She shook her head.
"No."
"Then what?" I stepped closer. "Say it." "It's not yours." The words didn't make sense. I waited for them to change, to turn into something else. "That's not funny," I said. "Stop." "I'm serious," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I laughed again, louder this time. "You're pregnant with my child. We've been married 3 years. You're just nervous." "Ethan, please," she said, grabbing my arm. "Listen to me." I pulled away. "You're tired. We'll talk tomorrow." "No," she cried. "I should have told you earlier." My ears rang. "Told me what?" She looked up at me. "The baby isn't yours." I felt cold. "You already said that." "Because it's true," she said. I shook my head. "You're confused." "I'm not," she said softly. I searched her face for a smile, a joke, anything. "Who is it?" I asked, not sure why. She hesitated. "I can't tonight." "Who?" I demanded. Her silence screamed. My legs felt weak. "Rachel," I said. "Say something." "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. The hallway spun. "This is a nightmare," I said. "I'll wake up." She reached for me again. "Ethan." I stepped back. "Don't touch me." The party noise rushed back into my head, but it sounded distant, like it belonged to another life. I leaned against the wall and tried to breathe. My phone buzzed in my pocket, people asking where I went, but I couldn't answer. My hands shook as I looked at her stomach again, the curve I kissed every night. I remembered promises, names we argued over, the crib I built with my own hands. None of it felt real now. "Say something," Rachel begged. "I don't know how," I said. "Everything you just said killed my voice." "I was scared," she cried. "I didn't want to lose you." "You already did," I said. She covered her mouth, sobbing. I felt nothing, and that scared me more than the truth. I wanted to scream, to break something, to run into the street, but my body wouldn't move. I just stood there, empty. Outside, fireworks cracked through the sky. Inside, people laughed, counting blessings they didn't know could vanish in seconds. I stared at my wife, my home, my future, and understood one terrible thing. This year didn't begin with hope. It began with the end of everything I believed was mine. I stood frozen, knowing this confession would follow me forever, reshaping every choice, every relationship, every dream I had afterward. I stayed in the hallway after she spoke, staring at her like she had turned into someone else. "Say it again," I said. Say it slower. Rachel wiped her face and whispered, "The baby isn't yours, Ethan." I laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You're lying," I said. "You're scared. That's all." My chest felt tight, like hands were squeezing it. "Tell me this is a joke," I said. "Please." She shook her head and said nothing. The music from the living room thumped faintly, mocking me, reminding me that everyone else was celebrating while my world cracked open, piece by piece, with every breath I took, and I felt smaller, dumber, and helpless standing there alone with no answers left. "I asked you a question," I said. "How could this happen?" Rachel hugged herself and said, "It was a mistake." I stepped back. "Don't call it that," I said. "Mistakes don't grow inside you." She cried harder. "I never planned it." "Who?" I asked. "Who did this?" She closed her eyes. "Mark." The name hit me like glass. "Mark Reynolds," I said. "My Mark." She nodded. My stomach dropped. I remembered him laughing on my couch, promising loyalty, calling me brother. I shook my head and said, "No, you're wrong." She whispered, "I wish I was." My hands trembled as I said his name again, tasting betrayal, disbelief, and shame with every broken syllable. Each memory burned hotter than the last one did inside my chest without mercy at all. "I defended him," I said. "Every time someone doubted him." Rachel whispered, "I know." I laughed again. "I invited him into my home." My voice cracked. "I trusted him around my wife." She said, "I was weak." "No," I said. "You both were." My mind replayed barbecues, late nights, shared secrets. I saw his smile, heard his jokes, felt my stupidity settle deep. Rage rose, thick and burning, mixing with shame. "I wanted to hit something," I said. "I wanted to break him." Rachel said, "Please don't." I clenched my fists and breathed through my teeth, feeling my pride collapse while the truth laughed at me. Everything felt exposed and painfully small in that moment alone with her watching me. I turned and punched the wall. "Damn it," I shouted. Pain shot through my hand, sharp and real. "He isn't here," I said. "That's why you're still standing." Rachel screamed my name. "Stop, Ethan." I stared at my bleeding knuckles. "I won't hit you," I said. "I won't beg either." She sobbed, saying sorry again and again. I felt nothing for her tears. They slid past me, empty sounds. "I ask myself when love died," I said. "Was it before tonight?" She cried, "I love you." I shook my head. "Love doesn't do this." My ears rang, my heart raced, and the house felt like a lie built around me. Every promise echoed, mocking my faith and trust. I couldn't stay in that space anymore. The walls felt closer with every breath. I needed air and distance now badly tonight. I grabbed my coat. Rachel followed me. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Away," I said. "From this." She reached for my arm. "Please don't leave." I looked at her belly, and then away. "That child deserves honesty," I said. "I deserve peace." She whispered my name, breaking. I opened the door, cold air rushing in, clearing my head. My legs moved before my heart could argue. I said nothing else. She cried behind me, but the sound faded as I stepped outside, carrying silence heavier than any scream. I knew this night had ended two lives at once. My marriage and my friendship died together. I felt it with terrifying clarity then. Nothing would ever return unchanged after tonight. I stepped into the night. The door closed behind me. Fireworks cracked above, careless and bright. I stood there shaking, realizing one sentence had destroyed everything I trusted. I didn't cry. I just breathed and understood my marriage and my friendship were already over, buried under truth I could never escape. My phone buzzed, but I ignored it. I said, "It's done," to nobody. Each step away from the house felt final, heavy, and permanent. I knew tomorrow would be worse, but staying would destroy me. The cold burned my lungs and kept me moving forward. I walked without direction, holding myself together barely. Everything familiar collapsed behind that closed door. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. Not ever. I drove to Mark's house the next morning and stood at his door, my hands shaking. When he opened it, he froze. "Ethan," he said, "you shouldn't be here." I said, "I should have come sooner." He swallowed. "Come inside." I stepped in and said, "Tell me the truth." He sighed and said, "Rachel told you." I nodded. "Say it anyway." He looked down. "It just happened." I laughed bitterly. "That's your excuse?" He said, "We didn't plan it." I said, "How long?" He rubbed his face. "A few months." My voice cracked. "Months." He whispered, "I'm sorry." I said, "You smiled in my house." He said, "I hated myself." I said, "Not enough." He said, "I never wanted to hurt you." I replied, "Then why did you?" He had no answer. I paced and said, "You called me your brother." He said, "I still mean that." I snapped, "Don't say that word." He raised his hands. I was weak. I said, "You were selfish." He nodded. "Yes." I asked, "Every barbecue?" He said, "I felt sick." I said, "Every laugh?" He said, "I tried to stop." I said, "But you didn't." He whispered, "No," my chest burned. "You let me build a crib." He said, "I know." I said, "You watched me plan a future." He said, "I hated myself for it." I stared at him. "You still slept at night." He said nothing. Silence felt louder than shouting. A door slammed upstairs. Linda's voice called, "Mark, who is that?" He turned pale. "Linda, wait." She came down and saw my face. "Ethan," she asked, "why are you here?" I said nothing. Mark said, "We need to talk." Linda looked between us. "About what?" I said, "Ask your husband." Mark said, "Please." Linda said, "What did you do?" Mark whispered, "I messed up." Linda said, "With him here?" I said, "With my wife." Her face drained. "What?" Mark said, "Linda, I'm sorry." She screamed. "How long?" He said, "Months." She screamed again, raw and broken. That sound sliced through me. Linda cried, "You ruined us." Mark reached for her. "Don't touch me."
She turned to me.
"You knew." I said, "I found out last night." She shook her head. "Both of you." She slid down the stairs, sobbing. I stood there useless. Mark said, "Ethan, say something." I said, "There's nothing left." Linda cried, "I trusted you too." I couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. It felt hollow. Mark said, "I'll fix this." Linda laughed through tears. "You can't." I felt the room closing in. I moved toward the door. Mark said, "Don't go like this." I said, "There's no other way." Linda cried, "How could you?" Mark said, "I don't know." I opened the door. Mark said, "I never meant to betray you." I stopped and said, "Betrayal doesn't come from enemies." He looked up. I finished, "It comes from people who know exactly where it hurts." I stepped outside, empty and quiet. I wasn't angry anymore. That scared me the most. I walked away knowing the worst wounds come from familiar hands, not strangers, and that truth stayed with me as I left everything behind. I turned back once and said, "When did you stop seeing me as a person?" Mark said, "I never stopped." I said, "You did the first time you lied." Linda sobbed, "Was I ever enough?" Mark whispered, "Yes." She shouted, "Then why?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "That's the problem." Linda wiped her face. "Get out," she told him. Mark looked at her. "This is my house." She said, "Not anymore." He looked at me. "Please." I said, "You chose already." Linda cried, "Both of you leave me alone." I nodded and said, "I wish you strength." She didn't answer. I stepped onto the porch again, my legs heavy.
Mark followed me.
I'll regret this forever, he said. I replied, regret isn't repair. He said, what should I do? I said, live with it. He asked, can you forgive me? I said, not today. He said, maybe someday? I shook my head. I don't know. Linda slammed the door behind us. The sound echoed. I stood there breathing hard. Mark said, I lost everything. I said, so did I. He whispered, I never wanted this ending. I replied, neither did I. I walked away slowly, feeling hollow instead of furious. That emptiness scared me more than anger ever could because it meant something inside me had shut down. Rachel packed her things 2 days later. I'll stay with my sister, she said. I watched her fold clothes like nothing was wrong. Take everything, I said. It's already empty.
She paused.
Ethan, please. I said, just go. The door closed, and the house went silent. My phone rang nonstop. I ignored it until a man said, Mr. Miller, this is Daniel Brooks. I sighed. Lawyer? He said, divorce attorney. I said, figures. He said, we need to discuss assets. I laughed. What assets? He said, the house, savings, responsibilities. I said, responsibilities for a child that isn't mine? He cleared his throat. Stay calm. I said, I'm drowning. Daniel said, don't say anything you'll regret. I said, I regret everything already. He said, we'll protect you legally. I said, who protects me emotionally? Silence answered. Friends called. We heard, one said. I can't pick sides, another said. I said, you already did. Messages stopped coming. Nights stretched long. I stared at the ceiling, counting cracks, replaying words. My parents called. Son, are you eating? My mother Susan asked. A little. I lied. My father Robert said, we're proud of you. I heard the hesitation. Susan whispered, the baby. I said, don't. She cried softly. We love that idea. I said, so did I. I walked into the nursery. The crib stood there, perfect and useless. I built this, I said aloud. No one answered. I sat on the floor. My phone buzzed. Daniel said, Rachel wants shared furniture. I said, let her take it. He said, including the nursery. I said, please. He paused. I'll handle it. I felt weak. A friend texted. She didn't mean to hurt you. I typed. Neither did the knife. I erased it and said nothing. Another night passed. I slept an hour, woke shaking. Get up, I told myself. I couldn't. Rachel came back for boxes. I'll be quick, she said. I nodded. She touched the crib. You made this beautiful. I said, stop. She whispered, I'm sorry. I said, that doesn't fit anymore.
She cried.
I felt nothing. She left again. Daniel called. Mediation next week. I said, do whatever. He said, you have rights. I said, I lost them the moment I believed. My parents visited. Susan hugged me. You'll heal. I said, I don't know how. Robert said, time. I said, time didn't protect me. Bills piled up. The fridge stayed full and untouched. I scrolled through photos. Delete them, I said. My finger froze. Not yet. I heard laughter from a neighbor's house. I shut the window. Daniel emailed documents. I skimmed names and numbers. None mattered. I sat in the nursery again. I loved you, I said to the empty room. My throat closed. I loved someone who never existed. That realization crushed me. I pressed my head against the wall. I'm broken, I said. No answer came.
My phone rang.
Susan said, come home for dinner. I said, I can't. She said, you're not alone. I said, I am. The call ended. I stood, swaying. Breathe, I told myself. I couldn't. I slid down and cried for the first time, loud and ugly. I tried, I said. I tried to be enough. The nursery blurred. My chest hurt. I thought of promises, names, futures. All gone. I realized I didn't just lose my wife. I lost a child I already loved. That truth broke me completely. I sat alone on the couch, lights off, phone face down. What kind of man am I now? I asked the empty room. Silence answered. Do I destroy them? I said. Or disappear? I pictured Mark's face, Rachel's tears. My hands shook. Revenge would feel good, I whispered. For a minute. I stood and said, then what? The house echoed. I walked in circles, arguing with myself. If I beg, I lose. I stopped. If I scream, I lose. I leaned against the wall. If I vanish, I still lose. My chest felt heavy. There has to be another way, I said. Saying it out loud felt strange, like hope trying to breathe again. The next day at work, I stared at my screen. Unread emails piling up. Ethan?
Sarah Collins stood by my desk.
You okay? I said. Define okay. She frowned. You look like you haven't slept. I shrugged. Sleep avoids me. She pulled a chair. Want coffee? I said. I don't want anything.
She sat anyway. Talk, she said.
I laughed quietly. That's dangerous. She said. I won't fix you. I looked at her. Good. She waited. I said. My life blew up. She nodded. I heard rumors. I said. They're true. She said. I'm sorry. I felt my throat tighten. Don't be, I said. I chose who I trusted. She said, trust isn't stupidity. I stared at my hands. Feels like it. We sat quietly. Sarah said, what are you going to do? I said, part of me wants revenge. She said, and the other part? I said, wants to disappear. She nodded. Neither heals you. I said, then what does? She said, surviving. I laughed. That sounds weak. She shook her head. It's harder than hate. I looked up.
How?
She said, you wake up. You work. You don't let them define your ending. I whispered. They already did. She said, only if you let them. That landed deep. I breathed slowly. So, I don't chase them? She said, no, I don't beg. No, I don't perform pain. She smiled gently. Exactly. I felt something shift. Living well is revenge? I asked. She said, living honestly is. That night, I stood in my kitchen and said, I choose me. It sounded fake, but I repeated it. I choose me. I called Daniel. I want out, I said. He asked, of the marriage? I said, of this life. He paused. Selling the house. I said, yes. He said, that's drastic. I said, it's necessary. He sighed. I'll list it. I hung up and walked through rooms filled with ghosts. You don't own me, I told the walls. I packed a box. Then another. No more begging, I said. No more waiting. My phone buzzed. Sarah texted, you okay? I replied, trying something new. She wrote, that's brave. I stared at the word brave like it belonged to someone else. The house sold fast. It's done, Daniel said. I looked around once more.
Good, I said.
My parents called. You're moving?
Susan asked.
Yes, I said. Robert said, where? I said, somewhere clean. Susan said, running? I said, no, then what? She asked. I said, choosing. Silence followed. We support you, Robert said. I felt lighter. I loaded my car. This isn't escape, I said aloud. This is control. I sat behind the wheel and breathed. I don't need their downfall, I said. I need my future. The engine started. I drove away as the city shrank behind me. I wasn't running from pain. I was walking toward myself for the first time. I woke up in a small apartment with bare walls and said, "This is mine." My phone buzzed. "You settled in?" Sarah asked.
"Barely," I said.
She replied, "That counts." At work, my new manager said, "You're early." I said, "I like quiet mornings." He smiled. "Good habit." I started routines.
Coffee. Gym.
Sleep. When my phone rang, I answered calmly. Daniel said, "Paperwork is finished." I said, "Thank you." He asked, "How are you holding up?" I said, "Standing." He paused. "That's progress." I hung up and felt proud of a small thing. Weeks passed. My mother called. "You sound stronger," Susan said. "I feel clearer," I said. Robert added, "We hear things." I asked, "Like what?" Susan hesitated. "Rachel is struggling." I said, "I hope she's safe." Susan said, "She and Mark fight constantly." I felt nothing. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. After the call, I sat quietly. Why don't I hurt? I asked myself. The answer didn't come, but relief did. Sarah texted, "Lunch?" I replied, "Sure." Over sandwiches, she asked. "Any regrets?" I said, "Not today." She smiled. "That's enough." Another call came late. Mark's number flashed. I stared, then answered. "What do you want?" I asked. He sounded tired. "I lost my job." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Rachel doesn't trust me." I said, "She learned from experience."
He sighed.
"Linda filed for divorce." I stayed quiet. "She's taking me to court," he added. "I deserve it," I said. He whispered, "Do you hate me?" I thought. "No," I said. Silence stretched. "That scares me," he admitted. "It should," I replied. I ended the call gently. My hands didn't shake. At work, Sarah said, "You look calm." I said, "I am." She asked, "Does that bother you?" I said, "It surprises me." She nodded. "Growth feels strange." My father called again. "Mark's selling his house," Robert said. "Money problems." I said, "I hope he figures it out." Robert said, "You're different." I said, "I had to be." Nights came without nightmares. I slept. I woke rested. "This is new," I said. I liked it. Rachel called one evening. I answered. "Hi," she said softly. "What do you need?" I asked.
She cried.
"Everything is falling apart." I said, "I'm listening." She said, "Mark lies about money." I said, "I'm not surprised." She asked, "Do you ever miss us?" I said, "I miss who I thought we were." She whispered, "I ruined everything." I said, "We both made choices." She said, "I feel alone." I replied, "I felt alone too." She asked, "Can you help?" I said, "I can't." She said, "I understand." I hung up and felt steady. Sarah noticed. "That was her," she said. "Yes," I answered. "How do you feel?" she asked. I searched inside. "Free," I said. She smiled. "That's power." News kept coming through others. Linda won full custody. Mark paid fines. Rachel moved apartments. Each update landed softly. "I don't ache," I said aloud. That realization scared me. "Am I cold?" I asked. Sarah said, "No. You're healed enough not to bleed." I believed her. One morning, I looked in the mirror. "You survived," I said. I lifted weights, signed papers, cooked dinner. Ordinary things felt heroic. Mark texted once more. "I lost everything," he wrote. I replied, "So did I once." He asked, How did you live?" I typed, "By letting go." I didn't wait for his answer. I put my phone down. The power had shifted quietly. I wasn't winning. I was no longer losing. Rachel called late, and I answered without bracing myself. "Ethan," she said softly. "Are you busy?" I said, I can talk. She breathed unevenly. I'm scared. I waited.
Mark left, she said.
He packed and disappeared. I said, I'm sorry. She whispered, the baby's due soon. I closed my eyes. What do you need? I asked.
She cried.
Forgiveness. I said nothing. She added, not love. I know that's gone. Her honesty surprised me. Why now? I asked. She said, because everything is quiet and I can hear my mistakes. I let the silence sit. I don't hate you, I said. She sobbed harder. She said, I ruined us. I replied, we're already over. She said, I know. Her voice shook. I just need to know I'm not a monster. I thought carefully. You made choices, I said. So did I. She whispered, do you forgive me? I felt inside myself. No anger rose. No ache. I forgive you, I said. She gasped. Thank you. I continued. That doesn't change anything. She said, I understand. We stayed quiet. I'm alone, she said. I was alone too, I answered. You survived, she said. So will you, I replied. We said goodbye without promises. The next day, I sat in a small office. What brings you here? Dr. Kevin Harris asked. I said, I feel calm and it scares me. He nodded. Why? I said, I expected rage. He smiled. Rage is loud. Healing is quiet. I asked, am I avoiding feelings? He said, what do you feel when she calls? I thought, nothing sharp. He said, that's resolution. I frowned. Closure. He said, closure doesn't require reconciliation. That's settled in me. So, I don't need to fix her? I asked. He shook his head. You're not responsible anymore. I breathed easier. That feels selfish, I said. It's healthy, he corrected. After work, Sarah asked, how is therapy? I said, clarifying. She smiled. Good word. I told her about Rachel. How did it feel? She asked. I said, final. She nodded. Final doesn't mean cruel. I said, I know. That night, my phone buzzed again. Rachel texted, thank you for listening. I typed, take care of yourself. I stopped there. No extra words. My chest stayed steady. This is new, I said to myself. This is growth. Another call came days later. Rachel again. I answered. I won't take long, she said. I start therapy tomorrow. I said, that's good. She said, I think I understand what I did now. I replied, understanding is important. She asked, do you ever wish things were different? I thought honestly. I wish I learned sooner, I said. She sighed. Me too. I added, I don't need you in my future. She said quietly, I know. No anger followed. No bitterness. Just truth. We said goodbye again. This time felt permanent. I met Dr. Harris again. Any setbacks? He asked. I said. She called. He raised an eyebrow. And, I said, I stayed kind and distant. He smiled. That's emotional maturity. I asked, why don't I feel guilty? He said, because guilt belongs to unfinished business. I nodded. I'm finished. He said, exactly. I left lighter. That evening, I sat alone and spoke aloud. I don't need revenge. The words felt true. I don't need apologies. Also true. I don't need her. That surprised me most. I realized love can end without hatred. Regret can exist without repair. Rachel's pain was real, but it wasn't mine to carry. When she called one last time, I didn't answer. I sent a short message instead. I wish you peace. I turned my phone off. I didn't feel cold. I felt complete. I was checking into a hotel when I heard my name. Ethan? I turned and saw Mark standing near the lobby chairs. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders bent, eyes tired. Mark, I said. Silence stretched. He said, I didn't expect this. I replied, neither did I. He gestured to the chairs. Can we talk? I said, briefly. We sat. He stared at his hands. You look well, he said. I answered, I am. That seemed to hurt him. I'm not, he admitted. I nodded. I know. He swallowed. I lost everything. I said, I remember that feeling. He looked up. Do you? I said, yes. He said, I think about that night every day. I replied, I don't. He flinched. I deserve that, he said. I finally understand what I destroyed. I leaned back. Understanding came late. He nodded. Too late. I stayed quiet. He said, I was arrogant. I said, you were careless. He said, I thought I could control it. I said, you never controlled anything. He looked ashamed. I hurt you on purpose by accident, he said. I replied, there's no accident in betrayal. He pressed his lips together. I'm sorry, he said. I studied him. I believe you, I said. He blinked. You do? I said, yes. He looked hopeful. I added, it doesn't change anything. The hope drained. He asked, do you hate me? I thought for a moment. No, I said. I don't trust you. He whispered, that's worse. I nodded. It lasts longer. He rubbed his eyes. I replay your face when you walked out. I said, I replayed rebuilding. He asked, how did you do it? I said, I stopped asking why. He said, I ask every day. I replied, that's your work. He leaned forward. Is there anything I can do? I said, no. He exhaled sharply. I want to make it right. I said, right doesn't exist anymore. He stared at the floor. You sound strong. I said, I am. A long pause settled. He said, Linda hates me. I replied, she should. He said, Rachel won't speak to me. I said, that's between you. He said, I deserved worse. I said, pain isn't a competition. He looked up again. Do you think I'm a bad person? I answered honestly. I think you made selfish choices. He nodded. Every day. I said, then change. He asked, can I be forgiven? I said, that's not mine to give. He said, yours mattered most. I shook my head. It mattered then. He whispered, doesn't it now? I replied, no. He straightened slightly. You survived, he said. I met his eyes. I did more than that. He waited. I lived, I said. That landed hard. He swallowed. I'm stuck, he admitted. I said, stuck is a choice. He winced. Everything you say hurts, he said. I replied, I'm not trying to hurt you. He said, then why does it? I answered, because it's true. He closed his eyes. I miss who I was, he said. I replied, so do I. He looked confused. You miss me? I said, I miss the man I thought you were. He nodded slowly. I wasn't him. I said, no. The lobby grew louder. I stood. I have a meeting. He stood too. Will I see you again? He asked. I said, no. He searched my face. Ever? I said, this is the last time. His shoulders dropped. I deserve that, he said. I offered my hand briefly. He hesitated, then shook it. His grip was weak. Take care, he said. I replied, you too. I turned to leave. He called, Ethan. I stopped. He said, I'm truly sorry. I looked back. I know, I said. That's why I'm walking away. Outside, the air felt clear. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. I realized anger would have kept him important. Calm made him irrelevant. I walked down the street, phone buzzing with work messages. Life continuing. I didn't look back. I knew I wouldn't see him again. That wasn't revenge. That was freedom.